Welcome to Real Recaps. Today, we'll look at a 2020 South Korean zombie film called Alive. Jun-woo wakes up alone in his family's upper floor apartment. He sees a note from his mother that the rest of the family has left and tells him to get groceries as there's little food in the pantry. Jun-woo starts up a computer game and starts streaming. His gaming is disturbed when his playmates bring something up from the news. Jun-woo checks the TV and sees a large number of violent behaviors and assaults have been reported. As he watches the news, he hears the commotion from outside and sees people running, screaming, and some people violently biting and scratching one another. Hearing noises also coming from the hallway, Jun-woo checks it and a person bursts into Jun-woo's apartment saying that he's a neighbor. Jun-woo asks him to leave, but he refuses. Jun-woo then grabs a knife and sees that his neighbor's eyes have started bleeding, indicating that he's infected and that he'll start to turn soon. Within seconds, the neighbor starts snarling and attacks Jun-woo. Jun-woo struggles but is able to push his neighbor out the door, where an infected individual feasts on him. Jun-woo barricades the door with his refrigerator and watches the news. He receives messages from his mother and learns that they too are hiding, but he can't contact them as the reception has gone down. He rations what remaining food he has left and prepares to hold out. The next day he learns from the news that the infected exhibit cannibalistic behavior and should be avoided. The virus is transmitted through blood contact from bites or stab wounds. Jun-woo then decides to upload a photo of him and his location to social media, hoping that someone might see it. He puts his smartphone on a small drone and tries to fly it up in hopes of getting reception. This idea fails as his drone doesn't have enough battery left. Jun-woo sees a police officer running in the streets fighting off the infected but is quickly overcome. Jun-woo tries calling out to the police officer but is unable to help. He hears sounds coming from the barricaded door and sees that an infected has managed to make it in. The infected tries to push the refrigerator barricade and Jun-woo is forced to climb out to the balcony. The pursuing infected runs after him but falls off the edge. A few days pass and Jun-woo resorts to drinking liquor to keep himself hydrated. He learns from the news that the infected have still managed to retain some kind of intelligence and are able to do simple tasks such as opening doors. Some are even reported to remember skills acquired from their profession. 2 weeks pass and Jun-woo dances around drunk on rum. He hallucinates seeing his family come back from their trip and he hugs his mom. He snaps out of his daze and breaks down crying. He later tries to get reception by placing his smartphone at the end of a selfie stick and extending it out the balcony. He reaches out and finally gets a voice message from his family. He plays the message and learns that his mother, father and sister are all together hiding at his father's office. Jun-woo is distraught to hear his mother's message slowly turn to screaming and crying. He listens to his family get eaten alive and die at the hands of the infected. Not knowing what else to do, Jun-woo grabs a golf club and storms the hallway full of infected. He tries to beat and clobber as many of them as he can, cursing and shouting at them. The ruckus attracts more of the infected and Jun-woo is quickly overwhelmed. He snaps out of his rage and realizes he needs to get back. He sneaks around the hallway, past a few infected people, and is able to hide and sneak his way back into his apartment. On day 20 he sees explosions in the metropolis area and the power and water go out. Left with no food, no water, and no family, Jun-woo decides to end his life. He makes a noose out of wires and hangs himself in the living room. As he chokes, he sees a laser light shining at him from an apartment in the building adjacent to his. He quickly tries to get himself off the noose and eventually falls to the floor. He runs to the window and sees a woman looking at him through binoculars. He waves at the woman and she waves back. Yubin stares through her binoculars at a man who just attempted to kill himself. She hears a noise coming from outside her hallway and prepares to activate an improvised trap she made in case of the infected breaking through her door. The noise subsides and she falls to sleep. Jun-woo wakes up the following morning looking for Yubin. They exchange names by showing it through their mobile devices, but they're interrupted when an infected enters Yubin's apartment. It gets caught in her trap and she quickly kills the infected with an axe. The next day Yubin sees that Junwoo is hungry and tries to throw a rope across to Junwoo's apartment. It falls to the street in the middle of a crowd of infected. Junwoo sees this and gets his drone and flies the rope to Yubin's apartment. With a physical connection, Yubin then sends some food to Junwoo and he thanks her. As he eats, he sees the rope Yubin had thrown earlier and an infected fireman using it to climb up. As the fireman pulls the table, the rope is attached to flies across the room, hitting Yubin and knocking her out. Junwoo scatters to get his drone to fly out and knock the fireman off of the rope. He tries his best to distract the climbing infected man, but the drone gets smashed to pieces. Just as the fireman reaches Yubin's balcony, she shows up and cuts the fireman's hand off with an axe. Later that night, Junwoo heads out to his neighbor in search of food and supplies. He makes it to the next door apartment and finds supplies like climbing equipment and camping gear, seeing that his neighbor was an avid hiker. Just as he's picking up the food, his neighbor attacks and a struggle ensues. Junwoo fights back and manages to escape from the apartment. He got more food, water and some supplies, including a pair of walkie-talkies. He sends one to Yubin via the rope connection and the two start communicating through them. The pair share a meal together, with Yubin noticing that they like the same food. Junwoo thanks Yubin for saving his life. Yubin refuses to take credit, saying that she didn't save his life and he saved his own life with his decision to survive. It's revealed that Yubin had also attempted suicide, with a broken noose shown hanging from her ceiling. A few days later, the horde of infected on the streets start running and enter their buildings. The infected run through the corridors searching for any survivors they come across. Yubin sees that the 8th floor in Junwoo's building is the quietest and decides they should head there. Yubin repels to the streets and finds a gun. She fights off the infected and is almost overrun, but Junwoo appears and the two head to the 8th floor. On the 8th floor they encounter a group of infected and get cornered at the end of a hallway. Luckily a door opens and a man appears, rescuing them from the infected. They enter the man's apartment and share a meal. He informs them that he heard talks of rescue teams over the radio and that they'll be rescued soon. As they eat, Yubin sees a picture of a couple and their child. She also sees milk bottles but doesn't see any signs of a child. She asks the man where his kid is, but the man says he doesn't have one. Junwoo faints and Yubin realizes they have been drugged and that the man isn't who he says he is. The man gets up and drags a weak Yubin to a room where his infected wife awaits. The man thanks them for coming, as his wife had been starving for days. He traps Yubin with his wife and holds the door locked. Junwoo gets up, points the gun at the man and threatens to shoot if he doesn't let Yubin go. The man lets go of a rope holding back his wife and Junwoo dives for the rope, dropping his gun. Yubin is heard screaming while the man bargains with Junwoo, saying he'll let him live as long as Yubin remains. The screaming inside the room stops and Junwoo assumes the worst. The man unlocks the door. Opening it, Yubin, covering the infected wife's face with a blanket, lets it loose on the man. As the wife bites the man's neck, Yubin then shoots them both, but the gunshots attract the horde of infected. With no hope in sight, Yubin decides they should kill themselves before the horde arrives. Junwoo complies and forces himself to aim the gun at Yubin. Then, just as he's about to pull the trigger, they hear helicopters passing by. They quickly run up to the roof, with the infected trailing them closely. The pair are cornered on the roof, and as the infected burst through the door, a helicopter appears and soldiers start shooting at the horde. The two quickly get on the helicopter and they fly away. As they fly out, Junwoo gets reception and learns that a huge chunk of the metropolitan area is affected, with an estimated 50,000 infected. He also sees that many of the survivors have posted their pictures and locations on social media similar to what he did, and that the rescue teams are using this information to find and save them. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.